Hello, how are you? Good? Yeah? Good day too? Let me just tell you how just freaking thrilled I am to be here, just to be amongst the community. I hope you sort of realize and sort of share this as well, but it's a special time to just sort of get together and geek out about the stuff that we do every day for a couple highly concentrated days. And I'll tell you that I needed this very, very, very badly. We've had a bit of a rough month, my family and myself. We unfortunately started with a pretty serious family medical emergency that put a loved one in the hospital. And in order for them to be released from the hospital, a social worker would need to come to the house to make sure that it is habitable and had no tripping hazards and all of this stuff. Unfortunately, the husband and wife are compulsive hoarders. So for the last few weeks of my life was me sun up to sundown cleaning out a hoarder house, which is a little crazy. So, I need to be here. I'm really, 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 really glad to be here. And forgive me for using this as a bit of a therapy session, but I need to. And I promise you it ties in with what we're talking about here. But the characteristics, as I've come to learn, the characteristics of compulsive hoarding is excessively acquiring items that aren't needed oftentimes, right? They have a difficult time throwing out or parting with items. And the most crucial thing is an inability to organize those items or those objects, which leads to these situations that looks like this. Clearly not really a habitable room. It's a bathtub. So this is rough. So for 9 days, we did this. But in order for my soul to not become crushed, I started documenting all the fun objects that we found. So I'd like to take you on a quick tour of those, if that's all right. Like this thing made in West Germany. You're like, holy shit. Like 3 decades worth of stuff. There's some fantastic stuff. Great cookbooks. Quiche, quiche, quiche. One of my favorites. Really great sort of like history of graphic design and sort of product design. Like this is really, really cool. Like really great stuff. This thing I like to call it, like if Aaron Draplin were here, like he'd be like losing his shit. Like, oh my God, look at this graphic design. Like I kept envisioning him beside me just like going, wait, oh my God, that's the coolest thing, thick lines, all that. If you don't know Aaron Draplin, please look him up. He's one of the best people on the planet. Really, really cool stuff. And then also some incredibly dated, sexist paraphernalia just sort of like lying around, like this stuff, this one. Women of Steel, these mild-mannered girls next door, muscling in, jeez. But my favorite one actually is below that. Acoustic musicians, still alive and picking. It's good to know. Good to know that's not, all those people aren't dead. Some pretty killer security features. There's a Google Plus joke in here somewhere. I'll just sort of like leave that be. Rest in peace. Just like, really great stuff. Really great stuff. So again, this is how I preserved my sanity, because like, look at that mustache. God, it's amazing. So anyways, so this occupied my life for the last few weeks. Was taking this and going, we have to take care of this. So we rented a 30-foot dumpster, quickly filled that up, round one, in a day. But we ended up making some progress. So there's that same garage saw at the beginning, and sort of clean things up and systematically, methodically move through the house, room by room, sort of documenting our progress and sort of making this stuff happen. Going through, making sure it's clear of toxic mothballs and sort of cleaning up all of the garbage and sort of creating categories of stuff, clustering like things together, like cookware, and sort of seeing 17 pans together and sort of with the intention of having the husband and wife go through and sort of say, okay, like what are like the 3 pans that you actually need, and then we could sort of donate the rest or whatever. So we made really good progress. Moving through, discarding the sort of cruft, right? The old outdated stuff, and sort of getting from a situation that looked like this and turning it into something like this. And so for a couple weeks, we worked sun up to sundown to make this happen. We did it. Cleaned out a hoarder house entirely. So, thank you. Made us feel very good. Until 3 days later, we decided, we put our lives on hold, our businesses on hold, and to take care of this. And then eventually we had to go back to our lives. And a friend of the family then sent us a photo 3 days later of this, that same bathtub somehow found more stuff back in it, including a thing of pineapple. It's like, okay, all right. This sucks. I mean, but it gets to the heart of what I want to talk about, which is a continuation of a lot of themes that we've already heard. Is that to solve compulsive hoarding in this situation it's not just a matter of cleaning out a house, right? We haven't addressed the root of the issue, which of course runs deep, right? These are deep psychological sort of things. There needs to be a lot of work done to correct those things in order to prevent this stuff from perpetuating itself. So sort of bringing this back to the land of sort of our world, right? If these are the sort of symptoms or characteristics of compulsive hoarding, we'll say that go out on a limb and say all digital organizations are hoarders of sorts. We excessively acquire digital properties, right? Your organization used to have a website, now somehow it has 30, and we justify that and sort of make that stuff happen. And of course we have a hard time sort of modifying those things or sunsetting those things or ever sort of killing off things. It's like it just sort of more or less drifts into neglect. And then thirdly, we have an inability to organize and coordinate these digital properties, right? So they're all moving in the same direction. They're all sharing the same stuff, right? So hence design systems, right? Yesenia showed a slide similar to this yesterday, right? So that's what leads us to these messes in the first place. And of course, that's where the world of design systems come in to sort of help wrangle all of that stuff, as Yuna was just talking about, as Yesenia was talking about yesterday, right? And again, this process, the process by which we go about creating design systems is very, very similar to that process of moving through this amazingly cluttered house, categorizing things, weeding things out, sort of thoughtfully going through and saying, okay, this stays and this goes and so on and so forth. Right? And we end up with a clean house, or we end up with a neat and tidy code base and a set of reusable components and some style guide, sort of website that contains the documentation and all that great stuff that Yuna was talking about. And we do the same thing, right? We did it. Hooray! We created a style guide, right? We created a design system and it includes all this stuff. As we've done all this hard work, here we go. Let's celebrate. Let's sort of, hooray, we made it. I'm not fooled anymore, right? The last couple years of my experience sort of working with organizations, creating different design systems and consulting on these efforts lead me to look at that celebration and get a little more skeptical. Friends, this is the best money I've ever spent on stock video footage. Look at that. Just keep looking in the background. It's incredible. All right? So again, you know, it was a great effort. It's a Herculean effort to sort of wrangle all of this stuff. But, you know, at the end of the day, all of that thoughtful documentation, all of those reusable components, all that great stuff could end up buried in the trash can next to all of those static design artifacts, those PDFs, those, you know, sort of well-intentioned project plans and all that stuff. So we need to prevent that from happening, because a design system, as I like to say, should be like a bottle of fine wine that appreciates in value over time, rather than a new car that you drive off the lot and immediately depreciates in value, right? By the way, that's like the one sort of happy byproduct of compulsive hoarding, is that the wine just sort of sits there and ages. And so we like took a bunch of like wine from like 1998 home. We're like, okay, I think that's a good thing, right? Like wine ages, and that's good. So this is a talk about making maintainable design systems. And I just want to just fully, this is a very tough position, because this literally could be the only slide in my presentation. What they said, what Yesenia said yesterday and what Eunice said today, like all of that. And I think that this is, it's really telling that, you know, this conference decided to have 3 talks on design systems, and specifically talks about sort of those failed efforts and how to overcome those. So just by show of hands, who's working on a design system initiative right now? Okay. Who has lived through a failed design system initiative? Right. That's a lot of hands. Right? Who, like Yuna's sort of question about sort of the diet plan, who feels like they've successfully gone through and created their, you know, sort of design system that is thoughtfully and perfectly powering their products? Like 0 hands. Okay. Maybe one, like one person's confident enough in that. So my goal with this talk is to hopefully complement what Yesenia and Yuna were saying over the past couple days, and you know, just recognize that it's like, this is freaking hard. This is really, really hard, which is why there are 3 talks about it. So it's not just, you know, sort of a quick fix, right? It's not just going in and cleaning out a house and saying, we're done. This is fundamental change. And I'd like to talk about sort of 3 different avenues for thinking about creating maintainable design systems, through the lens of product, through the lens of process, and through the lens of people. We'll start with product. Thanksgiving's coming up, not that far away, right? And when you go home, like, what do you tell your family, right, whenever they ask, like, what you do, right? Eric talked about this a little bit yesterday. It's like you say, I make products, right? I make websites, or I make apps, or whatever, but broadly speaking, right? It's like, I make sort of digital stuff, right? This is a conference for people who make digital things, right? People who make websites. And that tends to still be our sort of primary way of what we think we do. The problem with this mentality is that, you know, product will always take priority. So any attempt at like a style guide or a design system to sort of serve that product is sort of hanging off to the side, right? And you can sort of see what can happen with that. It sort of drifts off to the side. And as soon as that style guide, or as soon as those components, as soon as all of that stuff doesn't reflect the reality of your products, ceases to be functional, ceases to be useful. And again, you're back to square one, and you end up with yet another, you know, sort of initiative like this in the design systems graveyard. So what we have to do is fundamentally change how we think about an effort like this, right? We're no longer just designing and developing a website or an app. We are creating the systems that in turn power those products, that power those applications, that power those websites, and that ultimately power that style guide, right? And this is hard work. This is really, really hard work, because again, it's about the people, it's about changing minds, right? So this is really incredibly critical that in order for a design system to be successful, the systems design and the product design need to directly feed one another, and in a lot of cases just be one and the same. You are creating the system at the same time you're creating your products. What Yesenia said yesterday is just so incredibly spot on, right? That these design patterns don't exist in a vacuum, right? They don't ignore the context they're in, the people that are using them, the content they're displaying, and how they need to work together. Successful design systems solve specific problems, right? Like, this is just truer words have never been spoken. And in my consulting work over the last few years, I've gone into organizations who have spun up the button feature team, and the card feature team, and the hero feature team, and the forms feature team. And we're like, what are you doing? And they're like, we're creating a design system. And it's like, no. Another company, they're like, hey, yeah, like we're using atomic design, and like, these 3 months we're doing atoms, and then we're gonna graduate on to molecules, and no. It's funny, atomic design sort of coined this buzzword, and buzzwords are both a blessing and a curse. And on one hand, they give you a nice shorthand of how to talk about sort of a complex topic and sort of like whittle it down to 2 words, and which is cool. But on the other hand, it's ripe for abuse. And a lot of people have sort of taken this atomic design to basically mean, oh yeah, blow up your components and start with these, sort of atomic elements. And that's just not true. Atomic design is sort of, as I define it, is this 5-step, I'm sorry, not 5-step, 5 sort of part methodology that all happens in tandem, right? It's not step 1, atoms, molecule, step 2, molecules, and so on and so forth. It's a way of thinking about our UIs in a thoughtful, hierarchical way. And crucially, what this does is connects that product design and development to the underlying system that powers those products, right? Yesenia did such a great job explaining how important it is for that system to be tied into that system and to create that system. And atomic design is a methodology by which you could create both the whole and the parts of that whole at the same time. So just as a refresher, atomic design, sort of starting at that atom level, right, the basic building blocks of all of our UIs are things like buttons and inputs and labels, but those aren't terribly useful on their own. So it's at this molecule level that we're able to take those atoms and combine them to form these relatively simple components that I call molecules. And then sort of from there, we're able to take that simple component and put that into the context of a more complex component that I call an organism. So a header organism might be comprised of a logo atom, a primary navigation molecule, a search form molecule. All of that stuff sort of hangs together and operates as its own discrete chunk of interface. So this is good because now you start seeing things become more tangible. And then at the template level, what we're doing is we're putting those components, those organisms, into a page layout. And here you're starting to see an actual UI take shape. And then finally, the sort of 5th and most complete sort of phase of this methodology is the page level. And it's at this page level where we pour real representative content, real representative user scenarios, real representative real life stuff, real product stuff into these UI components. And it's at this level, this is obviously hugely important because this is what your users are going to see and interact with. But this is also where we're able to sort of validate or invalidate the underlying system, right? What happens when you pour this picture of mountains into this hero unit with this specific headline inside of it, right? Does it all hang together, resize the window, see how it all sort of and does it hold up, yes or no? But what happens if you add, a different picture hero image of a bunch of people or something like that and a really long headline? It's like, well, that's not good, right? So what happens in that scenario? You have to go back and sort of solve that problem at a more atomic element, right? You have to, or a more atomic level. So you have to sort of fix the system in such a way that it allows for this kind of scenario, this real product scenario to be achieved, right? So it's this sort of virtuous cycle between product design and system design, right? So it's not start with the components, and you know, I'm not saying that, like, yeah, that's what a lot of people think atomic design is Brad's saying start with components. No, it is not that. Please don't do that, right? It is not a linear process. Going old school. I was going to actually have it blink, and then I was like, maybe I'll just write some pseudocode, but anyways. It's not a linear process. What it does is, again, allows us to sort of thoughtfully traverse between abstract and concrete, between the whole and the parts of that whole, and to be able to do so concurrently, right? To be able to sort of zoom in and zoom out. Frank Camaro talks about this in his book, The Shape of Design. He uses the analogy of a painter. And he says, the painter, when at a distance from the easel, can assess and analyze the whole of the work from this vantage. He scrutinizes and listens, chooses the next stroke to make, then approaches the canvas to do it. Then he steps back again to see what he's done in relation to the whole. It's a dance of switching contexts, a pitter-patter pacing across the studio floor that produces a tight feedback loop between mark making and mark assessing, right? So when you go in and you zoom into a specific component, into that hero component, or into that button component, or whatever, and make changes via atomic design, you're able to sort of zoom back out again once you make those changes and see how that's impacted real products. Right? Here's an example of Instagram with the atomic design sort of methodology attached to it. I have no idea if they actually use this or not, but this is just sort of an example of, you know, you could explode any UI, whether web or native or your bank's ATM or whatever, into its atomic pieces, right? And so you're able to sort of step through how this handful of icons and how this handful of little text components and how these, you know, a couple different image sizes come together to form the bulk of the Instagram UI. So you're able to step through how those things come together to form these relatively simple components like the header, right, which is essentially just a logo and a couple of icons. And then all the way through to organisms where the real sort of meat and potatoes component of the entire Instagram experience takes shape, right? That photo, we'll call it a photo organism, right? So this is the thing that contains that sort of metadata above it, the avatar information, the sort of actions for that photo, as well as the sort of you know, like information, the commenting and stuff like that. All of that serves as the basic building block of that entire thing. And of course, it contains these subcomponents, right? But this is really where the magic happens. And then so at the template level, we put all those things together into a page layout, which of course, because it's a mobile app, is quite simple layout. And then it's really at this page level that Instagram's product designers are able to sort of come in and play out all of these different scenarios, right? All of these different user scenarios and product scenarios that they have to account for in their design system, right? What happens if the user's name is, you know, Brad_Frost or whatever, that fits nicely on one line. What happens if it's some crazy long string, right? You have to have a conversation about, you know, do we cap that on the back end, or, you know, like, do we have it wrap onto multiple lines, and so on and so forth? Is there a timestamp, yes or no? You know, or a location stamp, yes or no? You know, what happens if you're like me and you get like 0 likes on your photos versus like Taylor Swift, who has like a bajillion likes on her photos and stuff, right? You have to play out all of these scenarios. What happens if it's a video versus a portrait image versus a landscape image versus a carousel versus any number of the other things that you could put in there, right? So it's this sort of connection, this bridge between the actual real product and the underlying system that's able to play out right under the same roof. Gina Ann, who used to be at Salesforce and then at Amazon, she really talked about this notion of like how important it is for the system to inform the product design, and in turn, right, that product design is fed right back into the system, right? It's this virtuous cycle. So how do we do this sort of in practice? There's a bunch of different tools out there that could sort of help make this happen. I work on one of them called Pattern Lab, but there's also Fractal, there's Storybook, there's Vue.js. There's a bunch of these sort of what I call workshop environment. And this is the environment in which the actual sort of systems, sort of front-end components are built, are designed and built and sort of played out. And you're able to visualize them. You're able to pass in different properties to them. You're able to sort of stitch them together and sort of see how these things play out. So with Pattern Lab, which sort of looks like this, just sort of out of the box, what we're able to do is, again, sort of create this bridge between the product design and front-end development and the actual system. So for one of our enterprise design systems, we created one of our pilot applications that we started off the system with was a sort of meeting agenda sort of application. So we created this screen, right, as part of this actual product need. And out of it, we were able to sort of create these data tables. And we were able to sort of see what that data table looked like whenever it didn't span the full width, whenever we poured real complex content and data inside of that table component, what happened on small screens. We sort of opted for this sort of horizontal overflow pattern to sort of scroll sort of to the rest of the data and all of that. So it's through the lens of this real product need that we were able to come out the other end with this reusable table component, right? So it's not starting with the table component. It's starting with, OK, we're building this specific product, and this specific product is going to give us tables, this page header, this toolbar, this pagination component, and so on and so forth, right? And it's through the lens of that product work that we're extracting those components and sort of building, getting these things out the other end. Same thing with page templates. So we ended up with like a nice generic page template for, OK, you need a table, you need to display a table, and that's like the main thing that this screen needs to do. Here you go, right? An analogy that I use that I think, again, Yesenia's talk yesterday just did a perfect job at explaining this, but it's like tools in your basement or in a tool shed or in your toolbox or whatever. They didn't just arbitrarily get there. You didn't just like get drunk and go to Home Depot and buy the entire store. That sort of sounds cool, actually. Never mind, I take that back. But like, that's not how this works, right? What ends up happening is that you have a need around your house or whatever, and you have to sort of fix a thing, or you might need to sand something down, and you might not have a sander. Well, so you have to drive to Home Depot, go purchase a sander, right? Invest that time, invest that energy, that money into buying that sander and bringing that home in order to complete your project. And then the next time you encounter a project that needs a sander, guess what? You have that sander, right? So again, just to sort of underscore this point, like it really does need to build real software projects, right? The system can't, as Yesenia said, be this hypothetical thing hanging off to the side. Another thing that I encounter time and time again is a lot of pushback, certainly on the design end of things. I caught a lot of crap for publishing this article. But this is one thing that I see a lot of organizations investing in. They're biting down hard on creating these UI toolkits and libraries inside of Sketch. And that's great, and that could be helpful. But I sort of talk about this as like, you're getting really good at making pictures of websites. It's like going to IKEA and like coming home with a manual. And you could like, that's some good reading, but you can't actually do anything with that, right? Because at the end of the day, all of those sort of Sketch components need to be converted into code, right? And this is always the thing. Like I talk about this with many a design team, and it's like they're frustrated because all the great stuff that they've done in Sketch hasn't actually made it into the code base, right? So it's actually you need to bake that stuff in, like Yuno is just saying. You need to bake all of that accessibility stuff, that color contrast, all that great stuff into actual functioning components that help build real software, right? You need the actual IKEA parts in order to build the dresser or whatever, right? You can't just have a picture or a sort of, and again, all the documentation, all the instructions, like that's all helpful and good and important, but unless you actually have the real freaking components, you're not gonna get very far, right? So for designers, the process changes quite a bit. What deliverables they're creating changes quite a bit, right? Because once you have these reusable components, we get to this point where it's like, well, you know, why do we need to go through this like giant comp phase, and why do we need to do all of this, right? We can basically take our reusable components, slap them together in an HTML prototype really quick, and basically stub out a new product screen in like a couple minutes. Right? The team at Airbnb, the wizards there, and Yuno was talking about that, they actually created some machine learning software that recognizes the 150 plus patterns in their pattern library that are in code, and you can literally go from a whiteboard sketch or a napkin drawing into real working code like instantly. Like, this is nuts. This is crazy. Right? But it's like, oh, where's the room for the designer and stuff? So it's like, you know, that's something that I think a lot of teams have to come to terms with, is that like we don't have to repeat this like heavy artifact, static comp-driven sort of process once you have a living, breathing system. And again, that's not to say that there's never any utility for that, but it just means that we need to sort of free ourselves up to work on more worthwhile things. One thing that I think that designers can do and should be doing is taking ownership over the sort of design properties that make up the design system, right? This term design tokens has been talked about already, but like just sort of get into the weeds a little bit more with it. It's really popularized by the Salesforce Lightning Design System, right? They created their design tokens that power the Lightning Design System. And basically what we're talking about with tokens is that you have all of these digital properties, right? You have even sort of communication materials like PowerPoint slides and stuff like that are all making use of the brand's color, the brand's typography, the brand's sort of, you know, characteristics, right? That make the brand unique. So what design tokens are these things elevated out of any one product code base or any one sort of piece of software, and instead serve as this implementation agnostic source of truth. Starbucks green is defined as this, right? Not, oh, in our apps? No, everywhere, right? You're able to define this thing and manage this thing in one place, right? Manage Starbucks green in one place. And then what you're able to do is sort of have that stuff plugged in and sort of be imported into various different software applications. So this is cool because what you could do now is take and tokenize background color values, type color values, font families, font sizes, font weights, line heights, border colors, border radius values, and so on and so forth, and basically have that stuff centrally managed. There's different tools out there to sort of get those tokens from the ether into software products. Salesforce released a tool called Theo that does that. Amazon actually just released one called Style Dictionary, which is a new tool for them to sort of convert design tokens, sort of definitions into actionable sort of variables in software products. And Yuno is just talking about Design System Manager by InVision. And this is a pretty cool tool because what this does is sort of provides a bit of a GUI for sort of managing design tokens. So the other ones are a little more sort of text heavy. So it's like, here's a JSON file that defines what our brand color palette is. And here's a, you know, sort of a crude way of doing that, which is nice, but not exactly designer friendly. So what DSM does is sort of gives you this web dashboard that shows what your design tokens are. So you're able to say, okay, here's our brand colors, here's our logos, here's our text styles, and so on and so forth. But this isn't terribly helpful just because it's a web interface, and you know that's not really too powerful at all, but what is powerful is whenever it integrates in with the tools that designers are using. So they have a Sketch plugin, it's integrated into InVision Studio as well. And from there, it also kicks out a bunch of different formats, like CSS variables, Eric was talking about yesterday, or Sass variables for people using Sass, or a JSON file, right? And so basically it sort of punts these things out into whatever format you need. So that means that designers, I'll sort of show an example of this, designers can make a change. So come in here and just sort of like give you like a little bit of a tour. You know, you have your brand colors, you have your neutral color palette, you know, your utility colors for things like success and errors and your logos, all of that stuff, your different sort of text styles and stuff like that. And again, we're able to sort of pop into Sketch, and let's say, you know, that's that represented in the little plugin, in the little sort of modal window there. You sort of have that same information sort of beamed down from the cloud into your design tools. And then we have Pattern Lab set up, and that sort of primary heading is sort of wired up into my code base. So as a front-end developer, I take that. And let's say the designers are working on a new product screen or whatever, and they're like, you know what, our primary headings you know, need to be bigger, and they need to be the brand blue. So we're going to make that change. We're going to update that text style in our thing. That sort of gets synced up. And then the next time that me, as a front-end developer, pulls that thing down and refreshes and rebuilds the page, I'm able to sort of get those styles. Right? So that's a really, I think, a really, really, really powerful way to get designers closer to the metal, to actually be contributing to the real live code base, but not necessarily like handing over the keys to all of your Sass files to the designers. It still allows designers to use the tools that they're used to using, but then it sort of like gets exported sort of thoughtfully into different approaches, which is pretty neat. Just one more example, sort of showing we have in Pattern Lab, it sort of like kicks out all of your Sass variables and displays them as little color chiclets as a reference. So if the designer wants to come in here and create or add a new color to your brand's color palette or whatever, you could do that, add that sort of token to your design system, give it a name, and again, like, this isn't a solve. You still need to be communicating between designers and developers and all of that. But then what I'm able to do is pull that thing down. And again, the next time that this project rebuilds, I now have that new variable available to me. So this is cool. And I feel like this is the right sort of overlap between sort of designers and developers. This is almost as far as I'm willing to go. I'm a little skeptical of any sort of design tool that says like, never have to touch code again, right? Our thing will sort of spit out all your production code. And like sort of, you know, on the flip side, it's like, I get nervous about things that are like, oh, okay, just take your React library and backfill it into your Sketch thing. And it's like, that's cool. But I like this because it's like the right amount of a handshake. You're not like trying to like do the developer's job for them or the designer's job for them. You have this sort of handshake that exists as like, okay, designers, you control these variables, and then as a developer, we're going to sort of take those, ingest those into our code base and go from there. Okay. So the next thing in the process is figuring out how to get the design systems into products. And this is really, really crucial because, holy crap, this seems to be a massive oversight in a lot of organizations. All the organizations I duck my head into, it's like they're, you know, again, working on their UI kit, they're working on creating their buttons and all of that. They're less concerned about how those buttons are actually going to make their way into powering real software applications. So this is really, really crucial. So Una just said, you know, if a design system is harder to use than the current system, people won't use it, right? So this has to become integrated into product developers' sort of workflow, just by default, right? So how do you actually make that happen? There's this concept in the design system world. Any Monty Python fans in here? All right. Yeah, there we go. Called like the Holy Grail, which is basically you're able to make this change from one place and then sort of see that change sort of ripple effect into products, right? You make a change to the design systems button, you know, you hit the publish button, the product gets updated with that button. The style guide gets updated with that up. It's like, you get the idea, right? Make a change once, it changes everywhere. That's really what teams are after. And certain teams, like the Lonely Planet, have actually made that happen. They wrote an API for their design system, and which basically means that they don't expose any front-end markup in their style guide website. They basically said, cool, if you want to use this alert component, here's the API call, and here's the different properties you can sort of play with. So all of that sort of front-end code is managed from one centralized location. And that means that whenever they make a change to their front-end code, it sort of gets, that API sort of consumes, or gets consumed by their live website as well as their online style guide. So there's a few different articles that talk at length about deploying design systems and the various sort of methods of doing that. And Yuna also talked about this as well, which is great. So hopefully I can sort of build on that. Marcelo Summers has an article called Chasing the Holy Grail. And then Nathan Curtis just released a series, actually, of sort of how to deploy and ingest a design system into a code base. But so the best way, and I think that this was option one in Yuna's talk just then, just a minute ago, was talking about like how great it is to just ingest a design system as a project dependency, right? So at this stage, most products are making use of things like package manager, like NPM or Composer or whatever. So it's like plug into that, right? Find a way to get your system into your products and make it easy because they're already running NPM install or whatever. Just make that system be a part of that dependency tree, right? Second option, which Yuna just talked about as well, was sort of like CDNing or sort of like linking up to those static assets, right? So, all you need to do is include the style sheet and your JavaScript file and maybe your fonts and your icons, and you're good to go, right? So that's like sort of the next best option, which is, it's not as integrated and not as sort of automatic, but you're able to sort of control that, especially using the sort of semverse things that Yuna was just talking about, right? So you're able to sort of plug in there, and then if a new version gets released, they could come in and bump the version of their style sheet and JavaScript file and so on and so forth. And then, of course, option 3 is to sort of just download a zip or sort of clone a repository and sort of go from there. Which is less ideal because it's less connected. But I think one of the big things, and again, all of my consulting clients haven't really given this much thought sort of ahead of time. So it's like, how do we get the design system into our code base? And you don't need the actual finished design system in order to start this problem, right? You could create just some garbage markup, right? There's a component, right? Here's the styles for that component. Here's some JavaScript, right? And this is my new design system. This is the best design system in the world. It's just a salmon div and an alert message, right? Every product wants to include that on their code base, right? But this gives you something to package up and then actually trial and deploy that to real software product code bases across your organization. And this gives you the opportunity to sort of, kick the tires and make sure that, these processes are actually going to work. And if you run into problems with that, you're able to address it before the system, becomes too large or too unwieldy. Another thing that we've seen time and time again is making sure that the design system is simultaneously integrated with different technology stacks, but is also bigger than any one technology stack. This is a thing that I run into time and time again with my various sort of clients, is seeing a bunch of technology in play. How many people have more than one technology in play, like powering their sites and applications and stuff? You're like not just a React shop, or you're not just a WordPress shop, or you're not just like it's like very often we have like tons and tons of different tech in play, and the design system needs to travel to all those places. Why? Because our users don't care what that stuff is built with, right? They don't care that the checkout flow is built with React and the home page was built in Drupal or whatever. Like, users don't care about that. They want a consistent experience end to end. So we have to be thoughtful about sort of how we deploy our design system and get it into these specific technology flavors. And then sort of the individual applications can then consume those technology-specific flavors. And then so what ends up happening is that when a change gets made to the canonical button, right, the React people can sort of make the appropriate change in their sort of thing. The Angular people can do the same, the Drupal people can do the same, and so on and so forth. And then sort of whoever's sort of eating that tech-specific flavor as a dependency can then get that sort of update eventually, right? So this creates this sort of like chain reaction whenever changes get made to the system. What's also cool, and like this is weird because I find myself writing like more complex graphics and stuff like this, but it's like the actual design and dev can happen in a certain technology-specific flavor, like React or whatever. We were working on a React design system earlier in the year, and so we were able to author our button and our card and all of that stuff in React, but we recognize that the output of that is the rendered HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So it's like, we're using this specific library to create that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and that in turn gives us that React flavor of the design system. But we also recognize that there's a bunch of other tech in play there, and so we can sort of take the React flavor, and other teams can use that as like a guide post, sort of use that library as a reference, and then sort of create the Angular-specific flavor or whatever other technology-specific flavor. This is hard. This is like hard to manage this stuff, but this is where you get to the point where, as one of the questions from the last session was like, this is how you can get a design system to scale to the entire organization, rather than just like one product that just happens to be using React, right? So that was a lot of stuff, but like, so deploying design systems, I recommend doing that, prioritize that, do that early. Determine which strategies or strategies will work, right? Downloading as an NPM sort of module or whatever, or sort of linking up to a CDN or doing stuff like that, like whatever you can do, sort of get in on that and get in on that earlier, right? Sort of like figure out, kick the tires with a couple product teams, talk to them, and sort of figure out like how they manage their dependencies. And then lastly, figure out like how this design system can be deployed to many different technology stacks. Okay. How to handle changes to the system. This is another thing. A lot of people have a misconception that like a design system is a set it and forget it sort of thing. It's like, okay, we made our components, like we can never touch them ever again, right? Anybody like encounter this in their work? It's like, all right, it's set in stone. But there's a whole bunch of reasons why teams create modifications to components over time, right? Bug fixes and performance improvements, accessibility improvements, and so on. And adding patterns, right? You're not going to have comprehensive coverage for all of your products, right? All of their needs right out of the gate. That's just not going to that's not going to happen. Similarly, removing patterns, right? Like sort of good for performance. Maybe if something isn't used at all for whatever reason, or you used to do carousels and then when you got rid of them, that's a good idea. So that's a good thing. So Salesforce released a mixin called, or a project called SaaS Deprecate that sort of builds in deprecating components into their workflow. So as users of the design system pull down changes and they're making use of a deprecated component, their build process will yell at them and say like, oh, looks like you're using carousel. We don't do that anymore. Here's what you want to use instead. That's pretty cool. But figuring out how to make changes, when and how to make changes, is tough freaking work. That's why this decision tree is, I think, one of the coolest things in the world. It's created by Yaeli de Leon Pearson. Hope I got that right. And she was one of the leads of the vanilla design system at Canonical. And they created this decision tree for when to create a new pattern or when to modify a component. So I'm going to sort of walk through this. So right out of the gate, okay, you start with the design system. The user comes to the design system looking for a component. Does the component already exist? Great. Does it fulfill all your requirements? Great. You're good to go. Okay, plug it in, call it a day. Go to lunch early, whatever. If the answer is no, then can it be amended? Can this component be amended to fit these new requirements while still fulfilling the old requirements? In other words, can you make an improvement or addition to this component in a way that doesn't break everybody's stuff? If the answer is yes, then okay, propose an amendment to this existing pattern. If the answer is no, we got to sort of go elsewhere. So now we'll sort of come down here. Does the component not already exist? And if the answer is, well, does something similar already exist? If the answer is yes, then go back up there and sort of go from there. But if the answer is no, okay, prototype a concept of what this new component is, right? And then it says, is it something that can be reused on more than one site? And if the answer is no, can you make it more generic? And then it goes back to that. I love that. It's like try harder, jerk. Right? Don't just go like, oh yeah, I need this, this one-off component. Try harder to make it reusable. But if the answer is like, okay, it truly is too difficult to, this isn't something that's going to be used throughout, then add it directly to the site as a snowflake. I love that. But if the answer is yes, it can be reused on more than one site, okay, then propose a new pattern, and here's the process by which you propose that new pattern, right? Create a GitHub issue, and then from there, it's going to be discussed with the working group. It's going to be discarded if invalid, so that answers sort of one of those, the questions of like sort of dealing with people proposing maybe invalid patterns or things that aren't a good fit for the design system. But then like once development is started, sort of like, round it out, take it from prototype to actually like working component, then that sort of gets approved and it becomes part of the system. So my advice to you is to steal this exactly, like not exactly, tweak the knobs to your own sort of workflow and stuff, but this is freaking amazing. This is great. Put that into the design system, like right as it's created, right as you sort of unveil it to the world, because what this does is this helps the users of the design system understand how they can be part of the contribution process, right? How they can be sort of helpful in creating and using the system, but also sort of being a part of its ongoing success, right? It's not like whenever this happens all the time, a person will sort of pull in a card component and they're like, this gets me 90% of the way there, but I also need it to do this. And then they hack it and they sort of, make a mess of things, and that erodes the integrity of the system. Just like Una was saying, like, 28% or something of their design system code base was like the code base itself, but then there's all these overrides and additions, right? This helps solve that because you're giving developers like a specific vehicle for sort of going, oh, okay, if I want to create a card that's also dismissible, so it has like a little X button in the top right, here's the process by which we do that. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is the people part of things. And without beating a dead horse, just, I think, really summed this up perfectly. Is like, it really is 80% people. And that's what makes it hard. The actual sort of specific technical decisions and the design decisions are like almost sort of after the fact. Is sure, whatever. You want to do React? All right, fine, whatever. Like next year it'll be Vue, and that's fine too. And like, who cares, right? It's all about the managing the people part of things. So really quickly, sort of starting with research, I think, is a really critical part of the whole process that Una so beautifully spelled out, right? Whenever she said sort of that hypothesis or sort of goal setting, the best way to make sure that your design system is actually solving real humans' problems, like Kate was saying, right, is to talk to them. Right? So at the beginning of our design system projects, we have these a research phase where we do stakeholder and user interviews, and the users of the design system are other developers, other designers, product owners, and VPs, and all of those people, QA people, and we get a sense of what life is like as a designer, developer, product person, or QA person there, and we sort of come out of those interviews with these nice little nuggets, right? Like, oh, you could probably carbon date our UIs based on the design. Right, the main challenges are the existing thousands of lines of code, acquisitions, and existing suite of technologies that makes up $1 billion a year. We'd like to not lose that $1 billion. There's a lot of institutional knowledge here locked up in people's heads. Slack channels are great, but it becomes a scavenger hunt to find information about how something's supposed to work. Right, for a basic expand collapse pattern, devs spend 2 days going to different teams to find the code and still had to rebuild it themselves. Right, so what user interviews do is allow you to sort of get a picture of what the current landscape is, what people are frustrated by, and what they're looking for out of a design system. And from there, you could actually craft the design system and actually lean into that frustration. Right? If you're hearing from a bunch of devs that, oh, it's too hard for me to keep up with the design standards, well, how do you lean into that and make the system so easy to comply with the design standards that they'd be sort of foolish not to use it, right? So from there, we'll sort of translate that into a kickoff workshop where we take these themes that we've learned through our research and end up having everyone, all the stakeholders of the initiative, vote on which ones are the most important outcomes and goals, right? So what this allows us to do is to sort of, give a heat map about what the priorities of the system should be and how to approach that, right? This goes beyond just sort of like, I know what a design system is, and we're just, me and my designer buddies, we're going to go off to the side and build it and then sort of force it down everybody else's throat. This is a way of getting that sort of shared ownership of the design system right out of the gate. But ultimately, as Yuno was just talking about, it's really, really important to have people who are overseeing this product, right? This design system product. And what we found is that there is a split between makers and users, right? There are people who are actively responsible for, growing the system and maintaining it, and then there are other people who will be consumers of it. And various organizations, right? The bigger the organization, the further apart the makers and the users can be, right? But if you're like a startup, makers and users might be one and the same. You're making the system and also consuming it, right? But what's important is that there's two different perspectives that need to be equally represented. There needs to be this bird's eye view perspective, and these are people who are overseeing all of the product silos that are happening across an organization and figuring out how the design system can help sort of like travel between all of these different silos. But then an equally important perspective that needs to be present in the design system is this sort of in the weeds, on the ground perspective, right? And so the design system makers are the people sort of, like looking down upon the whole organization. They're the ones sort of going through this process of approving changes and making modifications, but they need to work directly with the users in the business to make sure that it's meeting everyone's needs. The users, on the other hand, they provide this on-the-ground perspective. Like, hey, is the design system working for this specific product, yes or no, right? And they also might be the makers, but they might be separate dev teams or product teams or partner agencies or offshore teams and stuff like that. And they, of course, need to communicate with the makers of the system in order to make sure that it's meeting their needs. So, design system team makeup is essentially a product team, and there's different models for creating a design system team. There's a solitary model. I'll just skip that one because it doesn't work. Centralized design system team is having like a group of core people who are dedicated to working on the design system. And that's good, but that runs the risk of losing that on-the-ground perspective, right? If you have a design system that's sort of in an ivory tower a bit, that's an issue. The flip side of that thing is having a federated team that are working on other products and are contributing to a design system. That's good because it keeps that on-the-ground perspective, but it also sort of loses that bird's-eye perspective. And also, by the way, product roadmaps always take precedent over the system work. So you see like the initiatives drift if there's not like actual centralized ownership. So Gina wrote about the cyclical model where they basically have a centralized team as well as federated members and then pair up together to sort of ensure that both of these perspectives are accounted for. Okay. The last thing I'm going to talk about, and I'm sort of going to skip communication just because I feel like Una did a great job of sort of articulating that. But basically, yeah, communicating change to the design system, integrating with your design system tools and all of that stuff. But the last thing I want to talk about is creating a culture around the design system. And again, this is what we were talking about early on, is it's really fundamentally changing how people view and work with the design system. They have to make this a core part of their job, right? This isn't just this off to the side thing, this good idea that's good for everyone except for me. It really has to become the default way of everyone thinking about how they design and build products. And one of the best articles that just came out not that long ago was from Majera Moon, who used to be at Etsy. And she talked about how they crafted a culture that was around the design system. And I'm just going to sort of step through these. They have a design bug rotation, which means that different designers who are on different products across Etsy are able to sort of come in, swoop in once in an odd while, and pick up some design bugs that are in the design system. And this gets them working directly with the design system, and they're able to contribute and sort of have a better understanding of like how that system powers multiple products. Every new hire has the opportunity to join the design system team, and they say that that's a great way to get on board with the organization as a whole, because they're able to see this product that touches all the other products at the organization. Then they have a yearly rotation, which means that designers will literally sort of join the design system team for a temporary period of time. And that gives them great insights and also sort of weaves that on-the-ground perspective back into the system. And you have these people coming from brand backgrounds or development backgrounds or UX backgrounds, all sort of like joining up with the team and getting, you know, it rubs off on each other, right? Like they come out of it with a better understanding of how the system works and how the system, system's thinking in general. But then the systems team is able to learn real specific sort of learnings. And then the last one, and this was really freaking cool. The Design System Council is a regular meeting with representatives from different products, platforms, disciplines, and subject matter experts. So there's this thing, this is gorgeous right here. They have this sort of like regular meeting between all the different stakeholders of the design system, but also include subject matter reps, right? People who are especially knowledgeable about performance or accessibility or responsive design or whatever. These people are included in this as well. But then also web people, iOS people, Android people, email people are all sort of represented. And this helps ensure that there's a shared ownership of this design system, that this is not just like one pocket of the organization sort of, you know, forcing this upon everybody else, but this is really something that everyone recognizes as this is important for the shared cohesive sort of output of UI at our organization. So, doing all this stuff, again, it's hard work, but the idea is, again, for the launch of your design system to really be the first steps to true success, right? Rather than sort of having it be the first day of decay, right? And this is hard work. And again, you know, sort of bringing it back to this, like, this is not just like a clean it up over a couple weeks and call it done. This requires, you know, fundamental sort of rewiring of people's brains, literally. And that involves a lot of effort and a lot of professional help. In the case of compulsive hoarding and stuff, it requires, you know, therapy and a lot of support. And so, you know, just leaving you with that, I think one of the things that living through this experience, like, mental health is important. Talking about mental health is important. Destigmatizing mental health is very important. So, you know, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. And everyone, thank you very much for your time.